So today I'm going to be sharing just some research I've been doing on some recent travels around the Mediterranean, mainly Sardinia this year. I'm going to be looking more deeply at Menorca and some other places next year, although we're going to have a little bit on Menorca in this lecture. Now, somewhere I didn't really expect to be so rich in Megalithomania, but it really is. There's a huge amount going on there, from giants to even pyramids, giants' graves, these great Rajic towers, and many other things that really surprised me. So here's just some of the things we're going to look through in the next hour. Some of the themes. The whole area around Sardinia is really interesting. All the coasts of the Mediterranean that surround the area. There's a few anomalies I'd like to mention. And obviously I've been researching these giant skeletons that have been found all over the world. And there's certainly some examples, at least a few in Sardinia. And we'll look at a quick chronology of some of the types of sites that are found there. And really, you're going to be looking at my holiday snaps pretty much for the whole lecture. So I hope that's okay with you. Then eventually, through the whole Neolithic period into the Bronze Age, we find the Nariah culture, which is a fascinating warrior-style culture, which really kind of came to a standstill at the end of the Bronze Age. And this image of this gentleman here is one of the famous stone giants that were found at a place called Monte, which we'll have a look at too. So this is the area of Sardinia. This is it here. You've got Corsica there, which is its sort of sister island. Sardinia is owned by Italy as such. Corsica by France, which is kind of here. But this whole area, all around here, does really fascinate me. I've been to some of the sites around this area. So if we start over here, we'll do a quick tour just to put Sardinia in context in a megalithic sense. So we'll start over here at southern Portugal, or central Portugal rather. This is a place around the town of Vieira, and there's many ancient stone circles and dolmens with beautiful carvings all in this particular area. And this is just one of the earliest stone circles or cromlechs in the world that dates potentially back to 6000 BC. And you can see the different stages here. It's just more of a close-up of some of the stones that still exist there, and it kind of slopes down into this wonderful valley. So we're not going to go into detail with these first few sites. I just want to introduce you to some of the megalithic sites surround Sardinia. If we move into Spain, we have the Cairo Dolmens, which are in Andalusia, and they're just north of Malaga. And this is me strolling through one of them, so you can see how big this is. It's a remarkable chamber, which has a well that's been drilled into the ground that goes down like 30 or 40 feet. And there's many other sites in this whole area. Incidentally, these were discovered by the Vieira Brothers. And interestingly, my co-author is Jim Vieira, and him and his brother are known as the Vieira Brothers. It wasn't them. And also, this is just the entrance to the great Menga Dolmen at Antiquera. And you can just see the Megalithomania style we get all around this area. If we jump over to Italy, this is just a photo of me several years ago, about 10 years ago, in fact, at some of the sites that got introduced to me by Gary Bilcliffe, who's going to be speaking here next year. And you can see these are massive polygonal walls in many areas along the western coast of Italy, all north and south of Rome. There's about 20 sites that have this kind of construction, which really shouldn't be there, technically. These aren't talked about. People claim they're probably Etruscan, who were the pre-Roman culture, but they could be an earlier culture, possibly the Pelasgians, according to researchers like Gary Bilcliffe, who may have been the same people who even founded parts of Sardinia. This is another wall. Me looking a bit sort of gangster outside this town. This entire town was surrounded by these polygonal walls. We have cyclopean walls nearby as well. And we have the classic Etruscan style hypogeums, which we find all down western Italy. This is a style which is remarkably similar to what we find in Sardinia, as we'll see later. And you can see some of the rock-cut tombs. All again, these are supposedly Etruscan. And some of the curved kind of tombs that we find all in this part of the world. But what's really interesting is just off the coast of Sicily, a few years ago, a huge monolith was found, which potentially some people say dates back to 10,000 years. Some people call it a Stonehenge type monolith, but it's obviously much older, and it's been filmed and recorded and analysed. It's about 12 meters long, and it's pretty well cut. It's like a piece that's been cut properly in a precision engineering, and it's kind of fallen off a megalithic structure that was on the coast, or there was something down there. And this is when the sea levels would have been lower. This would have been exposed. So this is really interesting. We're finding these anomalies already around different parts of the Mediterranean, which question the antiquity of some of these sites we're looking at. This is just an analysis. I think it was done by one of the surveyors. And this would have been part of mainland Sicily, according to the professors who were looking at this. Also, obviously, in Malta, this is rich in megalithomania. We have many megalithic sites, too many to go into here. And we have some of the styles we will notice in Sardinia are quite similar. We have these hold stones, which is something we do find in some of the giants' tombs, and obviously the hypogeums. And some of the enclosures do resemble some of the very early sites on Sardinia, like Lemuria and others. We obviously have cart ruts and such on Malta as well. And huge monoliths, and Gigantia, which is one of the most impressive megalithic sites I've ever been to, on Gozo, which was said to be built by giants. And there's a nearby dolmen called the Sansuna Dolmen, which she was a female giant who existed on the island and strided across the country between Gozo and Malta, dropping megalithic blocks, and the sites were created like that, apparently. Menorca, we're going to have a bit more closer look at this later, just a few of the sites there at the end of the lecture. But we have these huge T-shaped pillars, which are really, really strange. These are sort of Bronze Age era, so they're nothing like Göbekli Tepe, which is obviously 10 to 12,000 years old at least. So there's a huge gap, but remarkably similar style in construction. Not only in Menorca do we have the T-shaped pillars, called taulas, we have the enclosures, which are remarkably similar, again, to Göbekli Tepe. So if this is some kind of memory passed down through generations, or pure coincidence, we really don't know. But if we head round to the north coast of Africa, we find sites like this, and this is near Tripoli in Libya. And we have these huge trilithons, which are remarkably similar, obviously, to Stonehenge, or what I like to call the Giant's Dance. And when you have the stories of Geoffrey of Monmouth and the giants bringing the stones over from North Africa and constructing Stonehenge from these stones, suddenly this kind of fits in to that story, that legend. And you get classic stone circles in Libya as well. This was illustrated in 1882. And these are all going to feature in a small book I'm doing for Wooden Books, John Martineau's imprint, which is coming out in October, about stone circles. If we move into Morocco, we have Massoura. This is a very interesting site that's been researched quite thoroughly by Robert Temple in his book Egyptian Dawn. And I really want to get to this site and have a look for myself. It's a huge stone circle with a huge mound originally was in the middle, with all these legends and stories associated with it, which do fascinate me because they relate again to the giants. This is just a plan of it, and one of the huge monoliths that is on the edge of one of the circles. Now, I also recently went to Tenerife, not just for the sun, but also to check out the so-called pyramids that are on Tenerife. And this is one of them I photographed with my jetpack, my drone, sorry. And this is there's about 5 of these across the entire country. They could be relatively modern, but they're certainly there. They're certainly pyramidical structures, which are really confused archaeologists. And even there's very strange stories on Tenerife as well, which I'm going to save to the next year's lecture when I get more into some more sites in this area. But there's a tribe of so-called red-haired and pale-skinned giants called the Guanche, who were there up until about the 1500s when the Spanish really invaded that country. And they lived a Stone Age lifestyle. And this is supposedly one of the mummies because they mummified their dead in that area too. So there's a lot going on, all around the Mediterranean, going out obviously into the Canary Islands and other areas. But I just wanted to show you in context what we're dealing with here, because Sardinia is right at the heart of this whole megalithic area. This is a satellite view of where Corsica meets Sardinia. Now, there's an interesting passage in the Odyssey by Homer, which states that when the hero encounters the Lastrygonians, a race of giant cannibals, at the foot of, I quote, the sheer cliffs on either side, which could be talking about this area here, because these both have very high cliffs. It could have been inspired by the entrance of Bonifacio, which is this Bonifacio Narrows, is this area here, which is a windy and treacherous area, which is only about 7 miles apart. So this was used by navigators in ancient times. And it does kind of fit with the kind of story that Homer wrote about. So I find that particularly interesting. What we also have in this area is Bonifacio woman. This is like an 6,750 BC skeleton that was found in a rock face in a kind of shelter in this area of southern Corsica. And it was found laid out in a specific way with the head facing one way, and it had what looked like red ochre around it as well. Whether that was part of the strata or whether that was part of the burial, we're not sure. But this is very, very interesting that there seems to be some kind of cult of the dead was happening here. It's 6,750 BC. There's other early remains that are found on mainland Sardinia in the southwest. In Marina de Arbus, which is found near the shoreline of Costa Verde. Professor Rita Mells, who's a geoarchaeologist of the area, said it's the oldest human found in Sardinia, and it dates back to the transition period between the Mesolithic and Neolithic, between about 10,000 and 8,200 years ago. And so we're looking at extremely ancient occupation of Sardinia, which really isn't recognized as such. It's really, the only really people that get talked about a lot on Sardinia is the Nariah people, who are the Bronze Age culture from about 1600, 1500 BC onwards. But we do find extremely ancient remains as well, and a very rich Neolithic culture there as well, which we'll have a look at. This is just a classic timeline of some of the different cultures that have been all over Sardinia and Corsica. This area here, the Azeri culture, very interesting. These are the guys who probably were building the rock-cut tombs. They were placing megaliths and dolmens on the island, some of the earliest people. But this culture here as well, the Bonu, I can't pronounce this properly, this culture here about 4,700 to 4,000 BC onwards, they kind of crossed over with the Azeri culture, 4,000 BC onwards. And these are a very, very interesting culture, because even before this time, going back to this kind of area here, about 6,000 BC, we have trading in obsidian, which is a very important product, which was traded all around the Mediterranean and potentially much further into Europe, because this was a prized possession for cutting, for various different reasons. It has sort of magical qualities that were noted by different shamanic cultures, so it could have been used for multiple purposes. We also have goddess figurines as well. This potentially go back to 6,000 to 4,000 BC, some of these. So we know that there were potentially goddess worshippers, and there's even been suggestions by archaeologists and anthropologists that the Maltese megalith builders may have had some influence on early Sardinia. And also, even Macedonia, there's influences there as well. This is on the right-hand side, it's the famous Venus of Macoma. This was dated to around 6,000 BC, which is contemporary with some of the earliest sites on Malta and Gozo. And on the left is a much more abstract artistic form, again, very similar to what we find on Gozo and Malta. And we have other pieces here, which is just I found particularly interesting in the museum. These are from the Bonu Ighunu culture. Correct me if I've said that wrong, Terence. 4,000 to 3,500 BC in the Sassari area of Sardinia. But these people were very interesting. They were like pre-Azeri culture. These were like the earlier peoples there. They cultivated wheat. They built simple shelters. Domesticated animals. They did have artificial caves they built as well, known as the Domus de Janus, or the fairy houses, which we'll have a look at shortly. And these kind of blended with the later cultures too. This is just one example of one of the graves with grave goods of the Azeri culture, dating to around 3,200 to 2,800 BC. with some of the grave goods there. These were a very interesting people. These really got into rock-cut tombs in a high level. These were like, you know, if we look at the Hypogeum on Malta, we'll find that there are examples in Sardinia which almost match that in quality and craftsmanship. Here's a plan of one of them, which we'll have a look at in more detail shortly. But you can see some of the pottery and some of the pieces on display at the main museum in the capital, with some of the goddess, some of these geometric goddess figurines, which we'll have a look at, you know, some of the patterns. It's very, very beautiful work. And they even did trepanning of their skulls as well. This is something we noted in a couple of the museums. This is one of the museums up north, I forget exactly which one it is, but we can see a classic example of trepanning, and it looks like they were doing it for surgical reasons, much like we find in Peru and the Americas and other places. We didn't find any real examples of elongated skulls, but there may be some which we haven't uncovered yet. Then we have the great goddess figurines. This one on the left here was found in a place called Sonorbi. Again, these ones are Azeri culture, and this one's made from alabaster and found at a place called Ponto Ferro in a tomb there. And it has some of the characteristics of later cultures as well, which were obviously influenced by this culture. Again, more Azeri culture, and we start to see the spirals, which we find obviously in Malta and obviously Britain and other countries around the world. We do find triple, double spirals and quadruple spirals in various parts, painted sometimes with red ochre or red paint, and carved into solid rock. Then we have these people. I'm not sure exactly who these are. Some of these are from Corsica, and we're not going to go too much into Corsica in this lecture because I didn't get a chance to go there. But it's a very interesting place. It's got stone rows, it's got dolmens, it's got more rock-cut shelters, and it's got many of these kind of humanoid statues here, which are very interesting, very strange, with sort of relief-carved faces and hats. I'm not sure what this is exactly, but it's very, very interesting when you get into this area. So we have these kind of humanoid figures, which they're very similar to ones that we'll look at shortly, a place called Tamale. We have more examples of, these are from the Abilzu Filigosa culture, 2700 to 2000 BC. These are like stylized upside down men, apparently. You can sort of see the head here and the arms and the body heading downwards, with very strange symbolism on it, with the arms kind of stretched out in a very strange way. The one on the left, I believe, is the Menhir of Laconi. This is quite famous, this one here. But here are some other examples from the area as well. More examples here from various places. Again, you can see the beautiful relief carvings, which, you know, to remind me, although quite a long time apart, of the Göbekli Tepe type relief carvings that we find in southeast Turkey. Probably not connected, but very similar style. And we have on Corsica itself, this is just a fascinating place. I plan to go here maybe later this year or next year. Again, we find like stone rows on the bottom left here, you can see this. All around here you have these menhirs, which are very, very tall, some of them. And some of them go back to 5000 BC. At one side, there's like something like 250 or 260 standing stones in alignments. So we're looking at a great megalithic culture also existed on Corsica, no doubt connected to Sardinia. It's just one of the photos from the museum that slipped in there. And so one of the things they built quite frequently actually on Sardinia, which surprised me, is dolmens. Now this is like a dolmen route, which is a photo from a museum. And this is like the area where they built classic, you know, table-type dolmens, which we'll have a look at shortly. And they went down through this whole area here in the northern part of Sardinia. One of the finest examples is this one. Sarcovacada. This is very, very interesting. It's kind of sort of north of Sardinia. And the top stone on it weighs 27 tons. So we're looking at quite a remarkable feat of engineering in itself. And it's around 2500 BC. It has a grey-pink trachyte stone it's constructed from, and there's some very well-carved pieces, as you can see on the front there. And what we'll notice as we go along into the giants' graves of Sardinia, this is a style that we do find on most of the giants' graves. Not all of them, but most of them. Sometimes it's almost exactly like that. So this could have been the precursor to the Bronze Age giant graves tombs that we'll have a look at shortly. There's some other examples of some dolmens. The one on the left is the Laku dolmen, and then there's another smaller one on the right there. We have menhirs, very large standing stones with a tiny one next to this one as well. This is something like 19 feet tall, so we're looking at very large stones here. This one is just called menhir. That's what the sign said. We couldn't work out exactly what this was when we tried to check it out, but we just drove around and came across this. As it was a bit dark, you can't really see that. This is just an aerial shot of going through, flying over a couple of the stones. Also, while we were in the area, we saw some clouds that looked a bit weird, a bit like UFOs. Thought I'd throw that in there for any Ancient Aliens fans. But we have the fairy houses, or the Domus de Janus, of the Azeri culture. And these are beautiful hypogeums, or rock-cut tombs that we find all over Sardinia, really. Mainly in the north, central areas. But remarkably similar to the hypogeum Halfracini in Malta. Here's just some examples from the website Stone Pages. I couldn't get into this one myself on the previous trip, but whoever took these was absolutely fantastic. Antonella Porcu took these photos, absolutely brilliant. And you still see the red paint and the blue paint. If you look at some of the detail here, it's quite beautiful. Beautifully rock-cut tombs. And here you can actually see checkerboard design. You can see these sort of diamonds or squares between white and dark blue on this very crystalline ceiling. And then we start seeing the spirals. This is something that I find quite remarkable in Sardinia, in this particular site. Further examples here, and I believe this has now been closed up, and you can't really go in it, so the people who took these photos, thank you for doing that. And then we start to see the sort of shaping of the ceilings, and this is really intriguing because it almost looks like wooden beams, but this is carved out of solid rock. This is a remarkably fine example of what we're looking at here in Sardinia. So this is what they were doing. There's hundreds of these all over Sardinia, in the central and northern areas, a few in the south as well. But you can see that there's a remarkable quality of craftsmanship. Here's some illustrations of the same necropolis. And we start to notice that there was a bull cult. They really loved their bulls. And these are relief carvings all over many different sites, all over the country. And it's something we find kind of often related to the goddess cult. It's the same, the sort of mother goddess cult and the bull cult always seem to be related, especially in this area of Sardinia. It's just a fine woodcut, early woodcut of one of the hypogeum we just looked at, but I thought this gave some brilliant detail just to get an idea of the sense of what we're dealing with here. This is actually a place in Benova. But I remember I looked through all my old photos when I went to Italy back in 2008, and I thought I went to somewhere that looked like this at an Etruscan site in Italy, and I found the photos, and yes, it's remarkably similar. This is the two different tombs here. We have not only the entrance, which is very similar. We have the sloping roof cut out of solid rock and these kind of beams going across. So even in Italy, even though there's quite a distance between the two countries still, there was obviously a connection. So which way around that went, whether the people of Italy, the Pelasgians possibly, or the Etruscans influenced those, or Sardinia, or the other way around, we're not sure. But there are other connections with Italy, and JJ found this image for me. And pointed out that we have some of the bronze statues. It's by George Valdez, a credit there. You can see a very similar style of headgear, of kind of whether this is plaited hair or some kind of scarf of some sort in Sardinia and in the Etruscan area of Italy. We have, again, more rock-cut tombs. I was going to show you a few examples of these with a kind of carved out of bedrock monolith in the center, a place called I'm not going to read these out actually, I'll put all the details here. And we have some beautiful bulls carved in relief inside the tomb. What's interesting about this, we'll start noticing that this shape is actually the shape of some of the giants' tombs when you look at them from above as well. So the influence obviously spread into the Bronze Age. Even the Rajic culture, who were the warrior culture, which came in later, were influenced by the earlier peoples on this island. This is Domus de Janus in Genus Salixi. This is it's almost like sloped in. You kind of walk into it, carved again out of solid bedrock. But in the northern area, in the north, kind of east area, one of the most impressive sites I've ever been to, in fact, is this. This is Monte de Cody Pyramid near Porto Torres, and this dates remarkably to 3650 BC to 2970, the first stages of it anyway. And you can see this is like a classic ziggurat with a slope going up. And you can see it's layered, different layers. It's got a monolith here, it's got a dolmen here, you've got an egg stone here. We'll have a look at each of these in more detail. But this is really, the first stages of this are contemporary with some of the oldest pyramids in the world. This is the same age, more or less, as Cairo in Peru, which is potentially the oldest pyramid in the world. It's older than the pyramids of Giza. It's older than most of the ones, all of the ones really in Mexico and Central America. And yet, we have a fine example here in Sardinia in Europe, which no one talks about, which absolutely fascinates me. And officially, it's been called a ziggurat because it's so similar to some of the ziggurats we see. It's in the territory of Sassari, near Porto Torres, but it's a massive stone platform. It's got an altar with it as well. The earliest stages were the Bonu Higunu culture, and then the Azeri culture came in, but there's occupation here from at least 4,000 to 5,000 BC. And then they started building different aspects of the so-called pyramid. The name translates to stone mountain or mountain with tail, which would represent the ziggurat slope going up, or the ramp. And you can see there are similarities. These are sort of very fine examples, obviously. The ziggurat of which is later, and some pyramids on Sicily, on the southern tip of Italy. These were some research done by Antoine Gagal. And obviously, it's quite similar to the ones on Tenerife, which we looked at earlier. But the earliest stage was this. This was the first platform, which is probably about at least 4,000 BC. And it was only really discovered in 1954. It's about 27 by 27 meters. It only goes up about 8 or 9 meters, but it is a remarkable sight. Here's the slope going down through, if you're standing at the top looking down. The structure was pretty much abandoned around 3000 BC, and there's evidence of fire there. But they did actually find kind of reused, reconstructed. There's also this very interesting egg stone, which is a very large boulder. It's kind of the shape of an egg, which has a kind of three-dimensional feel to it. It's got like cut marks all over it, and this is like almost like an omphalos or axis mundi stone, much like we find in places like Easter Island, where we have this particular place, the navel of the world on Easter Island. So it could represent that, almost like what we find at Delphi as well. Oh, sorry. So this is an aerial view of it, and just so you can see the shape. It's just me playing with my drone. I got permission, etc. But you can see the fairly square shape with the slope here. And this is some of the finds. This is one of the statues that was actually found at the site. This dates to around 1800 BC. And the Narajic culture, which came in 1800, 1500 BC, really ignored this place. They didn't really have much to do with it. They built Naraji towers all around the area, but weren't really interested in this particular site. This is like a dolmen, really, just on the edge of it, edge of the ramp. And you can see the sort of shape of it here. There's JJ, just so you give some sense of the size of it. And this is the menhir, which is on one side of the ramp, which was placed there much earlier than the pyramid itself. It's just a close-up of the top part of the menhir. Yeah, so this is just some aerial shots, so you can just get a sense of the size of this. It's surprisingly big. I could not believe it when I went to this place. I was quite blown away, but just gives you a sense of the magnitude of that. This is just from around the back of it. You can sort of see the sort of pyramid shape. And at the very back of it, we find these small statues, which are really stelae. And here's a close-up of what's actually carved onto them. There's also some spirals carved onto this bit of rock as well. But it's a very abstract shape in relief carving. It's like a potentially goddess figure, perhaps. No one's really sure exactly what it is. And here's the stone itself, what's left of it. And this is around the back as well. If you walk further around, if you start walking back around the front to where the dolmen is, and this is the altar. Now, it's believed that this was used by some kind of shaman or leader, priestly elite, because they found certain artifacts there that may represent that. And this again is just another shot of it, so you can get a sense of the landscape setting of this particular pyramid. So whether this is really classed as a pyramid, or whether this is classed as a ziggurat, or just a platform mound or something like this, we really don't know. But because of the shape of it, and it has all the sort of specifications of a ziggurat, this is technically, I think, what they call it now. One of the interesting things, there's stories about a tomb, like a cave that it was built upon. And you can't go in anywhere. They've got this kind of door here. So it looks like there's some kind of entrance here. Maybe Terence knows about this. But there's these stories of a cave being found here. Then the pyramid or the ziggurat was built on top of it. But when I was in the local museum, I found this photo. And this is it clearly states the tomb of Monte, Cody, the same name of the site. So whether this is underground, you can see the rock-cut tomb, you can see the zigzags and the windows cut. It's absolutely amazing. We find this obviously at Giza, under the Great Pyramid, at Teotihuacan, under the Pyramid of the Sun. They were built upon ancient caves. It was like a sacred entrance to the underworld, and they would build the pyramids on top of that. It could be the same principle. It could be a coincidence. This could be a couple of miles away. I couldn't find the info on this. But it's very, very interesting that we do find this connection here. This is the necropolis of Lemuri. This is up in the northeast, Arzacina area in Sardinia. Dates to around 3,500 BC, one of the earliest sites on Sardinia. And it's a series of what looks like stone circles with tombs inside them with a few standing stones. Basically, that's what it looks like if you just want to just look at it clearly. Again, 3,500 to 2,700 BC. Some of the menhirs here. There's 5 stone kists or cists, 4 of which are surrounded by circles. It probably had mounds of earth over the top of it, and they were used as burials, obviously. And this is one of the square cists or kists, going back to this era. There's just some information about it. But one of the interesting things I noticed on the sign, I always take photos of the signs when I go to sites, because you always find little bits of information. And they think it may be connected to some of the artifacts, excuse me, may be connected with the Aegean Balkan area, which is something, which is also connected with some of the sites in Corsica. So this is really intriguing to me. So we're looking at, Sardinia was like a trading route. It was the center of the whole Mediterranean, and this from a very, very early era. So I'll just flick through some of these, just give you a couple of seconds on each one. This just shows you the sort of circular enclosure, one of them, sort of leaning standing stone inside one of the square kind of graves. So it's a little bit dark, but it's just an aerial shot, so you get a sense of the placement in the landscape. And some very interesting simulacra and other features in the rocks and the cliff faces nearby. It was so windy, I didn't want to lose my drone, so I didn't fly too far away. Yeah, this is just flying over the top. It's quite small, it's not a huge site or anything, but it's just one of the oldest, and it's still there. It's near one of the, or 2 of the giants' graves in the area. One of the most interesting discoveries in Sardinia is the stone giants of Monte Prama. Now, these were found mostly in 1974, which is basically on the west central coast of Sardinia. near Capras, the province of Oristano. They're sandstone statues between 2 and 2.5 meters tall, 6, 7, some slightly taller feet. This is one of the early photos. I think it's about 1200 BC to around 900 BC, the site, but the site was pretty much destroyed. There's nothing really to see there now. But these statues are particularly interesting. Excavation was carried out between 75 and 1979. 5,000 pieces were recovered. And they were put in storage for many years. Eventually they were reconstructed into the statues. Many of them are in the statues in the capital now. And we actually we went to the museum, and you could just see that these are remarkable pieces from the Bronze Age. Possibly, it's been said, the most important discovery in Sardinia for the last 50 years. So this is the area on the west coast here. There's many other sites. Like you see all the different Nariah sites, giants' graves, a very rich area, but not much left of the actual site itself. This was a plan of the site that was carried out when they did the excavations. And just so you can get some sense of what was discovered, there was a few discoveries here. Some kind of Egyptian scarab was found, different phases. It was in some kind of alignment going across. So they were almost buried in alignments as well, which is a very strange thing. And these are stone giants, not humans, stone. Here's some of the early photos before they were reconstructed. And there were different forms of these stone giants, warriors, boxers. There's other ones which look like they're copies of like Nariah towers and things like this. These are just some of the examples here. And here's just a couple of the boxers, they call them, for some reason. And these are like very large stone statues, and they've got quite gormless features, very powerful physiques with shields above their head. And they kind of look weird, don't they? I've got to be honest with you. But they remind me very much of the Earth of Man statue in southeast Turkey. But often with these, or most of these, had small bronze figurines about this big, actually copies of each of the stone giants, or for each one of them. I think they've recovered, reconstructed about 40 of them. Sorry, excuse me. Again, these are some more examples of the boxers. That could be why they were called boxers. Imagine that left hook coming at you, crikey. And then we have the archers, not the radio show. This is the Monte stone giant archers. And these are quite distinctive features. They have kind of tunics and sort of front pieces on their body, very large shoulders, haven't they? And this is one of the reconstructions made from bronze. Sometimes they kind of reveal themselves, if you know what I mean. I'm not going to go into detail about that. And this is another example of what they were holding, like the bow, made of stone. Just some more examples here. These are the warriors, not the 1979 classic film. This is classic sort of shields they had, and they even had horns on some of them, which I find particularly interesting. But look, you can see the way they would be holding the shields when they were found with stone swords and other such things. And here you can see that they had very long horns. This could be part of the bull cult we mentioned earlier, and you can see that here. They would have been part of here. This is a reconstruction done by an artist, and also JJ put this together, so you can see this one particularly, what it would have looked like. So it would have been quite ferocious looking stone giants if you were at some kind of ceremonial area or palace of the ancient kings. It would be quite scary. You wouldn't go and mess with these guys, would you? But this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. There's potentially many more of these. There's another museum that has more of them in. And these are just, I was quite stunned. I was quite stunned when I saw this. And it's really worth a look if you're going to be in Sardinia to go and check this out in the museum. These are like models of Nariah towers, which we're going to have a look at shortly, which are stone towers. And they made models of them for some reason and buried them with the giants. Also bronze versions as well. They had this very strange thing as well. I'm not sure if this is a Nariah model or not. But it's beautifully carved. You've got 3D kind of look to it. You've got zigzags all around it. And just here you've got like a relief carving of some kind of animals all around different parts of the edge. You've got this beautiful kind of, almost looks like the roof of one of the rock-cut chambers or the hypogeums. And then we have these strange betels or batels. Now, these are very odd. These are found all over in different parts of Sardinia, but a lot of them were found at Monte Prama. They're potentially sacred stones of some sort. They're geometric, and it could be related to the Beth El, the Hebraic Beth El, the house of God. And they're kind of like sort of Axis Mundi stones, or there's some kind of power within them. I'm sure Terence knows more about these than I do. These kind of baffled me when I first saw these. I thought they were just, you know, things you put your cups of tea on or something, but they're not. There's something quite remarkable and something consistent and linked to the giant graves throughout Sardinia. They're like truncated cones, and they have holes carved into them, which could represent the eye of the deity that they're worshipping here. And they go back to about the 14th century BC, so they're very much part of the Bronze Age culture. And while we're on the subject of giants, stone giants, human giants, this is just a map put together by Cecilia Hall of some of the giants that we've uncovered, or at least found reports of, across Europe. And you can see there are a couple in Sardinia here, all along Italy, Sicily, all along this coast as well. So I want to have a look at a couple of examples just for any giantologists in the room, because this kind of, I did a bit of research for this lecture. There's up in Sassari, this was reported in 1953. And this talks about roughly 4,000-year-old, 8-foot tall giants were discovered. Now, where the bones are is a whole other question, but this was reported in 2 different newspapers in 1953. And there's legends of giants, obviously because of the giants' graves. This area on the west coast, not slightly further south than Monte Prama, this area is sort of famous for the giant stories of farmers digging up bones and teeth and other such things, but many of them are just stories, and we couldn't find any really good, solid evidence. But this was a photo which claimed to be a jawbone by Paula Harris, discovered by Luigi Muscas a few years ago. And clearly it's not human, it's like a horse or a cow or something. And then this was presented again as proof of human giants in Sardinia, and again, you can clearly see it's not a human tooth. So unfortunately, there's lots of messing around going on in Sardinia. There was an entire program created by Jamie Theakston and Yesterday Channel called Forbidden History that investigated this, and he kind of came to the same conclusions as us. I scanned the internet and found examples here of stories of people finding bones and skeletons in different parts, especially in the southwest area of Sardinia. Obviously, the newspaper reports were from up north. And this is the Jamie Theakston TV program. It's actually quite a good TV show. They have quite funny, cool subjects on it. And they kind of explored, actually featured Megalithomania speaker Andrew Goff as well on this. Here's one of the photos from the show itself, by Tanina Moore, which claims to be a giant skull. But around the area of a particular giant's tomb, called Orcu, which is in central southwest Sardinia. In this whole area where there are a few giants' tombs, apparently these farmers over and over again have been finding bones. Now I've got 15 examples of people being interviewed and talking about them finding these bones over the last 50 years, but not one of them, unfortunately, took a photo, which is really frustrating if you want to research this. And this was all researched by journalist Marcello Pilastri, who's a local journalist who's been trying to uncover this whole mystery. This is one example. Ingino Argiolas is a local woodworker in Torralba in central Sardinia. He found 3 huge skeletons in 1950, including a child holding a small bowl. He informed his father, who was a Jesuit priest, and people in big black cars came over and took them all away. Again, no one took any photos. But this was discovered near Cabras. This is very interesting. This featured in the Forbidden History TV show. And this kind of grabbed me because I searched online for this. I couldn't find anything about it apart from on this TV show. So I'm unsure of the authenticity. but this is supposedly very small, like the size of your thumb. 4 tablets were found, and they seem to have Giant Gallio written on them, which is a kind of translation as such of giants, or very close to it. And there's a Sardinian king supposedly represented on them. But what they claimed is this is the only evidence of written somehow in some kind of code on these tablets, the word giant, saying the giants lived here as such, we were here kind of thing. So this is interesting, but I need to look further into this. I couldn't find anything about it. Maybe Terence or others may have some more information about this. I recently bought this as well. This is like a DVD, it's online on Vimeo, called True Legends. And these are like some giantologists from America called Steve Quayle and others, and Timothy Alberino. And these did like a 2-hour documentary about the giants of America and Sardinia. And again, it was the same thing, lots of interviews with people who don't have any photos, claiming they found 4 to 5 meter tall giants or 10-foot giants. And there was even a huge excavation that was done in the early 1980s, where all these bones and skeletons and skulls were taken to this church. And unfortunately, again, no one took a photo. It really baffles me. And they say, oh, well, everything was stolen and taken away. And one of the guys here said he had loads and loads of evidence in his house that was emailed to him, all these photos from this museum. But mysteriously, his house burned down. And so therefore, there were none left, even though they were emailed to him. So little things like this do kind of lead to dead ends. This is just a still from the video. But anyway, let's get into the giant tombs. These are the most amazing, really, sights, and the reason I went to Sardinia in the first place. Here's just some examples, not all of them. I didn't want to put them all on because you wouldn't see Sardinia beneath it, but there are at least 320 recorded giants' graves, and they generally look like this. This is the sort of general look of what we're dealing with here. These are like West Kennet Long Barrow type tombs, very megalithic. They have this curved forecourt with this kind of almost like tablet-shaped stone with an entrance at the bottom. And this is all relief carved, all beautifully done. And as you can see, it's kind of got this particular shape, which is what we find all over Sardinia. This is just an aerial shot of the Orku tomb, which is the first one we went to. Just to give you an idea of the shape and landscape. And again, you can see the curved forecourt. This fascinates me because it does look like a bull's head. That's the sort of head, these are the horns. But it could also represent other things, which we'll get into in the lecture. It does look a bit like some of the tomb forecourts we find in Ireland. It's got resemblances to others around the world, but it really is quite unique to Sardinia. The thing about this particular one is it has a slightly different look, the interior. This is more like a Mycenaean interior. We have the corbelled roof, megaliths, very large stones, with huge stones going across the top. And you can walk upright in it. You can be 8 or 9 feet tall, and you can walk all the way through it, no problem. There's me looking a bit mean for some reason. I don't know why that is. And you can just see some of the pieces here. It's made of local basalt, apparently. It's very crystalline rock. It dates to around 1500 to 1300 BC. It's about 40 feet long, something like this, and about 4 feet wide in the interior. There's JJ at the top there. She's just sort of climbing through the top area here. And there's like a skylight in various parts of it. This just gives you an impression, just some filming inside the tomb so you can see the style more clearly. And it does, it does remind me, in some senses of the long barrows of Britain, like Hetty Pedlar's Tump, West Kennet Long Barrow, and others. This is the exterior. This is down one side of it, which has cyclopean blocks. Again, another angle from that particular side. So this is one style. There's really two styles. This is more the Mycenaean. It doesn't have the front tablet stone like we find on most of them. But this is another example. Obviously, someone's been shooting at this sign. This is a place called Imbatigi. This is, only real stone left is the stele stone, they call them, or the front piece. And again, you can see fine examples of stonework, relief carvings, very specific style with the forecourt. And some of them are quite small. They didn't really have much of a tomb at the back of them. And this shows you how thin some of them are as well. They're all very thin, much like we see at Göbekli Tepe, which you don't realize how thin they are until you go round to one side. Also near here, there's a Nariah tower as well. This just gives you a sense of the landscape in the area. There's not much left of the tomb itself. And that's it from behind. It's like a quite curved stone, this particular one. And the Nariah tower right next to it, it's just about maybe 100 feet away, looks like this. So there's not much left of that either, but this is like a classic small Nariah tower. There's another site called the Giant's Tomb of Santa Benzu, which is south of Barrow. Again, there's Nariah tower near here as well. So I'm going to move fairly quickly because it's more of a holiday slideshow now. Because I want to get through to show you as much as possible, just give you a taste of this particular area. And this is another one. It's a set of Santa Benzu again, not much left of it. You can see the general shape with the hole at the bottom there. This is a plan of what it originally looked like. Not much, you just really can't see much. There's not many left of some of these. This is the Nariah tower, which is very close to it. An old photo and a more modern photo. Just give you a sense of it. And these always seem to be connected to each other. Now this is an interesting site, the Tamale Giants' tombs and the Rajic settlement. Again, 1600 to 1300 BC. You can see the Nariah tower in the background there. This is something what it would have looked like. Beautifully, almost like a castle, really, these Nariah towers. This one doesn't have a front piece, like a tablet stone on the front here, but it does have a sort of false door, which is what we find in some of the giants' graves. It just shows you an overview of some of the tombs and the tower. You can see the classic shape, very geometric, and the great Nariah settlement here. We have Tomb A. This is it's one of the three tombs here. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly. There's not too much to say on this. But this just shows you walking into the tomb, and you can see the sort of stone here, the way it's been cut. This could have been easily, it could have been a large tablet stone here, but you can see the beautiful rock cut carvings here all throughout here. It's a very neat and tidy, what's left of it anyway. This is one of the three tombs at Tamale. And even at the back here, you can see quite beautifully cut stone as well, which kind of surprised me how precision carved this all is. You can see that here, and you can even see a curved area here. So this is probably from the back, the curved back. But this is really, really good stonework. I mean, I'm not a stonemason myself, but I've shown this to a couple of people, and it is surprisingly impressive. There's another tomb, Tamale B. Again, same kind of shape. It's a bit wider, this one. There's me looking stressed or something. I don't know what's going on there. But these are really interesting. These are the betals. There's 6 of these. And these are strange. These are kind of like female figurines with female features as well, which you can't really see too clearly on here. You can there probably. But there's 6 of these, all sort of almost in a line. This one's off-center. And then over this side, we have the Nariah towers. These are strange little stones, but very intriguing. This is the Great Nariah Tower at Tamale. And what's interesting here is that they have like these megalithic chambers, much like we find almost like in New England, which really, really surprised me. You get these kind of things in Cornwall and Ireland as well, these sort of megalithic chambers. And if you didn't know, you would think you were in New England. There's like maybe 200 of these chambers all over New England and New York State. The fact that we're finding them in Sardinia, probably a coincidence because it's a classic, simple design, but interesting nonetheless. This is the Tomb of the Giants at Cody. This is one of the classic ones, really. This is the Arzacina area of northern Sardinia. Huge stelae. And there's a Nariah called La Prisciona nearby. My pronunciations, please forgive me, anyone who's watching this. But this is the classic one. This is one of the most fine examples. This is probably, 9 feet tall? Something like this, 10 feet maybe. This is one of the older ones. This is 1800 BC. And it's thought by some that the tombs were here before, and these front pieces were added sort of later. They were a later construction. The megalithic tombs were probably by the Azeri culture, possibly. And then these were added later in the Bronze Age. But we're not sure about that. These could be generally much older. This is an aerial shot of what the tomb actually looks like. The alignment of it with huge stones on top and the curved forecourt. Yeah, and this gives you another angle on it here. This just gives you a sense, sorry about the camera work here, I was flying at the time. And this just gives you a sense of the shape of it. And you can see the smaller stones kind of go around the main tomb, but the interior has massive stones. Some of these are probably 20, 30 tons, I would imagine. But the front piece is always really thin. That's what really gets me. They're so thin, but they're very precisely cut and carved. But yeah, so these are, I mean, there were 320 of these. There's only, what, 30, maybe 20 left now. There's really not many left. But some of the people who from this area claim they found the giant bones in here, but I'm not so sure about that, unfortunately. This just gives you a back view of the giant's tomb. And this is the nearby Nariah, which is just up the road. You have to go a bit more higher elevation to get to this. It was closed at the time, but it didn't stop me flying. This just gives you a sense of some of the shape of it. It's quite a complicated shape. From above, it looks amazing. It looks like a sort of whole series of like rooms, almost like a labyrinth going around, which we find examples of these called Taliotic towers on Minorca as well, which are remarkably similar. This is Lilogi. This is the giant's tomb in the same kind of area. And this is the classic one. This is like the one that's on the guidebooks front covers. And it really is quite beautiful. Again, going back to potentially 1800 BC. It's been reconstructed, it's been pieced back together. There was a trace of a tumulus over the site as well. And as with many of them, there's a southeast alignment. So we do find that it's oriented to the southeast. And you can just see the beautiful stonework here again. And this is a view from the back. There's not much of the tomb left, not many of the large stones are left, unfortunately, but you get a sense of it for sure. And that's just looking through the sort of portal entrance. There's different theories, obviously, of what these were used for. One of the theories, actually, was actually on a sign at this site, I think, talk about telluric currents. Someone says that the shape of it is to attract and control telluric currents of the area. And this is even on Wikipedia. I couldn't believe this. And so there's actual talk about this kind of thing within the sites, and it's being recognized that they could have been to trap and control the energies and create a fertile landscape in the area. This is another site which is slightly further south. And again, you can see many more of the stones here are still in place. So I'll just jump back a sec there. Yeah, no, that's the one, yeah. So this is slightly further south at a place called Tomes, which is sort of central north Sardinia, slightly to the east, but very interesting nonetheless. Absolutely amazing. I just love these giant tombs. I've got to admit it. There's JJ posing at one of them, just to get a sense of the scale. And this is the sign you see, where it's outside some of the giants' tombs. This one was actually closed. You were not allowed in it whatsoever. But the gate was there was a little gap on the side of the gate, so you just walk through and no one's there, and it's absolutely fine. They have been compared to the dolmens of the Caucasus because of the hold entrance and the kind of polygonal cyclopean blocks. And even some of them in that area of the Caucasus actually have curved forecourts, which I found particularly interesting, with the whole stone at the center, at the bottom of the entrance stone. So this is something that Andrew Collins would call a soul hole, where the soul travels after death, after being buried in here, and it's projected back into the night sky, into the great rift of the Milky Way. But the curved forecourt here, finding this in Russia or Caucasus was very interesting. These are often called giants' tombs, and there's been giants, bones and skulls and other such things also discovered in this area, all over Russia, in fact, and the Caucasus. But anyway, the Nariah Towers, this is a place called Santa Cristina. This is one Nariah Tower, which also has what's amazing holy well, these rock-cut wells that are carved solidly into like the bedrock with precision engineering, which we'll have a look at shortly. But before we get to that, this is the Santa Cristina complex, which is now a kind of convent, really. And here's some of the megaliths you see on the way in. And this is just a information board about the Nariah Tower, which is here. dates to around 1500 BC. And this is a classic Nariah. This is what we find all over. There's something like 8,000 of these at least are being recorded. I think more than that. I think up to something like 10 or 15,000. And there's 7,000 still remaining, at least the remains of them. Some are huge, with huge amounts of labyrinths and rooms. Some are just simple ones like this. They often have staircases built within them as well. This is just a view from inside the Nariah, and you can see like the little window thing like we see at Newgrange and other places. That's looking out into the main complex. But at this particular site, we have the Santa Cristina Holy Well, and this is really intriguing. All this was probably added later, but it's this area here. These are steps going down into this whole underground area here, and here it's like a skylight. You look up into the sky. This is something we find many of these holy wells in Sardinia. These are very, very interesting. Said to be built in the Bronze Age by the Nariah people, but they could be older. This is just a view, thanks to Maurizio Cossu, who got some aerial shots. I didn't get a chance. We did visit it, but it was kind of very cloudy when I went there, so I couldn't get any good shots. This just shows you some of the other buildings around the area. The Nariah is over here. And one of the things I found quite strange about this is when you actually look down into it, it kind of disappears into nothing. It's like you're going down into like the underworld. But apparently every 18 years, 1 month and 2 days, this is the cycle, very close to the 18.6 year cycle, mind you, the full moon shines directly down and illuminates all the steps. So if you go there every 18 years, 1 month and 2 days, you'll see that. When that actually happens, I'm trying to find out. But also the sun on the equinoxes, on the March and September equinoxes, also shines down into it and illuminates it. So often they have ceremonies there at this time. And this is what you're looking at when you walk down there. And you get to the bottom and you can see this beautifully cut stone. It's like almost polygonal, really. You can see the shaping of it. Beautifully done. They're all just half an inch out from each other, so it kind of like does this whole beautiful kind of beautiful cut corbelled roof effect. It's unbelievable engineering. It's much like what you find in some of the sites in Egypt or even Peru. This is just the top area. This is Skylight, and that's when you're looking out from it. That's all you can see. This particular shape. Again, this is another one, holy well, which is from a chap called Solar Megalith. I'm not sure if that's his birth name or anything. But again, it shows you this kind of leaning walls here and the curved stone, beautifully rock cut site. Okay, I'm pretty much out of time. And here's just a few other of the holy wells. I'll just skip through these. But the Nariah Towers, these are fascinating in themselves. It's not something I really went to Sardinia to see, but these are the main archaeological sites of Sardinia. These are what you kind of get. This is the most famous one, Sunaraxi, which I managed just to fly my drone over illegally. Wasn't supposed to, but I couldn't resist it. It was such good light. And you can sort of see the sense of size and shape of this site. It's absolutely remarkable. Now, these were all Bronze Age. They were said to be built more as defensive constructions rather than anything spiritual or ceremonial or anything like this. But this is up for debate after hearing Freddie's talk last night. And you can see some of the Cyclopean stonework all around it. It's really quite remarkable. Some of it, huge stones. The interiors are very complicated. This is a plan of it from above, so you can see what we're dealing with here. And so these were real megalith builders even into the Bronze Age. This is a nearby hill, I believe. There's not much information. There's like a chapel has been built on top of it. It's very much like sort of Glastonbury Tor. It could even be a man-made construction, according to one of the documentaries I watched. And this is Losa Nariah. This is one of the most famous ones. And you can just get a sense of some of the different styles and shapes associated with these. But there's no real evidence of sort of much ceremony and that kind of thing going on here. So this is why these have been given the label of defensive structures. but they have spiral stairways, often going up to the top so you can get out. And apparently from one Nariah to another, you can see the whole country of Sardinia if you have a whole network of people, soldiers on top of them. That's just the interior of the Losa Nariah. You can see the Cyclopean style, not dissimilar to what we see at Silistania Cotimbo that Freddie mentioned last night on the coast, around the coast of Lake Titicaca in Peru, where we have, again, the corbelled roof interior happening there. Just an aerial shot to get some sense of the shape of what's left of this one. Just a bit of sunset photography there. But there are many ideas about what actually happened to the Nariah culture. Some say it was destroyed in some kind of cataclysm, but this is really up for debate. No one really knows if this is the case or not. This whole area of the southern part of Sardinia was some kind of tidal wave may have hit it around 1300 or 1200 BC. And this because many of the sites were covered in mud and rubble. But it's thought that the Sardinians certainly moved over different parts of the Mediterranean. And we can see evidence of that in Menorca. I'm going to just have one more minute just to have a quick look at some sites here, which I'm going to talk about more thoroughly next year. We have caves carved out like we find in Sardinia. We have the Nariah Towers, which here they're called the Taliotic Towers. We have combinations of the Nariah or Taliotic towers with the enclosures. These are really very interesting. These are much like the enclosure we find at Göbekli Tepe or even in Malta. And that's just an aerial shot of one of the Taliotic towers in Menorca, which is remarkably similar to Sardinia. You can't deny that. And obviously the classic towlers, they're called. And these are supposed to be the giants' tables where the giants would sit and eat their meals from. That's the legend, that's the story that goes with most of them. Here's just some examples from different parts of Sardinia. Again, these represent the bull kind of symbolism. And this is a huge, there's megalithic cities in Menorca. You would not believe, this is just a segment of one of the megalithic cities we find in Menorca. They also have the navetta, which is like a megalithic construction, like a chamber, with cyclopean interiors and exteriors. And the famous navetta to Tudons. This is very interesting, very strange place. It's smaller than you think, but it gives you an idea of what we're dealing with when we spread out from Sardinia. And I believe Menorca was very much influenced by the remaining Sardinian culture. It fits with the timeline, and we're going to look more at that particular area next year in my talk at Megalithomania. So thank you very much for listening.